Hip-hop has always been bigger than music. It's a lifestyle built on ambition, rebellion, and survival. But for some rappers, the same fire that pushed them to the top also pulled them straight into the hands of the law. What starts with fame, fast money, and endless spotlight can quickly spiral into court cases, mugshots, and years behind bars. Here are 11 rappers who broke the law and served major prison time. Starting at number 11, we have Slick Rick. Before rap became the global giant it is today, one of its earliest stars found himself trapped in the very kind of story he used to rap about. Richard Walters, better known as Slick Rick, was hip-hop's greatest storyteller. With his British-American accent, flashy jewelry, and that unforgettable eye patch, he painted pictures in music like no one else. His 1988 debut, The Great Adventures of Slick Rick, went platinum and turned him into a legend almost overnight. Songs like Children's Story didn't just entertain, they defined what storytelling in rap could be. But in 1990, the line between the fantasy in his rhymes and the reality of his life blurred in the worst way. Rick had his cousin and bodyguard Mark Plummer after accusing him of extortion. Instead of moving on, Plummer launched a campaign of intimidation. Rick found bullet holes in his front door. He felt his life and his family's safety were at risk, so he armed himself. On July 3, 1990, while driving in the Bronx, he spotted Plummer. What followed was a moment that would change his life forever. Rick pulled out his gun and opened fire, hitting his cousin and also injuring a bystander. To Rick, it was self-defense. To the courts, it was attempted murder. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison, serving 5. While behind bars, he released 2 albums, The Ruler's Back and Behind Bars. Both flopped, and Rick himself later dismissed them as garbage. His career, once full of promise, was stuck in limbo, but prison wasn't his only punishment. Rick had never become a U.S. citizen, and as a British-born resident, his felony conviction triggered years of battles with immigration authorities. Even after his release, the government tried to deport him. He spent another 17 months in detention in 2002 after returning from a cruise performance. It wasn't until 2008, 18 years after the shooting, that New York's Governor David Paterson granted him a full pardon. Moving on to number 10, we have Tupac. If Slick Rick's story is one of lost momentum, Tupac Shakur's is one of tragedy that reshaped the entire hip-hop landscape. By 1994, Tupac wasn't just a rapper, he was a force of nature. The son of Black Panther activists, he was equal parts poet, rebel, and movie star. His albums were going multi-platinum, his film roles were winning praise, and his name was everywhere. He was already becoming the voice of a generation. But just as his career was peaking, everything came crashing down. In November 1994, Tupac was already facing trial for a sexual abuse case when he went to record at Quad Studios in New York. What should have been a routine night turned into an ambush. In the studio lobby, he was 5 times and robbed. Hours later, he was in court, bandaged and in a wheelchair, listening to a guilty verdict. By February 1995, he was sentenced to 1.5 to 4.5 years in prison. They sent him to Clinton Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in upstate New York. From behind those walls, Tupac dropped Me Against the World. It debuted at number 1, making him the first artist ever to top the charts while locked up. But prison also hardened him. He became more paranoid, more convinced that his rivals had set him up. That belief would drive the East Coast-West Coast feud to deadly levels. While he sat in a cell, Suge Knight came calling. The Death Row Records boss dangled a lifeline. He would pay Tupac's $1.4 million bail if Tupac agreed to sign a 3-album deal. With no other way out, Tupac accepted. It was a decision that would define the rest of his life. Signing with Death Row gave him the freedom he craved, but it also tied him to one of the most dangerous chapters in rap history. It led to the release of All Eyes on Me, a diamond-certified classic, but it also tied him deeper into the East Coast-West Coast rivalry that would ultimately cost him his life on a Las Vegas street in September 1996. Marion Suge Knight is next on the list. Suge Knight was never the man with the microphone, but for years, he was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, controlling hip-hop's most dangerous empire. As the co-founder of Death Row Records, he helped launch Dr. Dre's The Chronic and Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, 2 albums that completely changed the sound of the 1990 seconds. Death Row became a giant, and Suge Knight was the intimidating face at the top. He wasn't shy about using fear, violence, and his connections to the mob Piru Bloods to get what he wanted. To outsiders, he was a record executive, but to those who crossed him, he was a gangster in a business suit. Knight's life was full of courtroom drama. In the late 1990 seconds, he was already serving time time for assault and parole violations. But the moment that ended everything for him came on January 29, 2015. That day, tensions boiled over on the set of the Straight Outta Compton movie, where Knight got into a heated argument. Hours later, he pulled up to a burger stand in Compton and came face to face with Cleabone Sloan, a consultant on the film, and Terry Carter, a local businessman and a friend. What happened next was caught on camera. Suge Knight, driving his red Ford truck, backed into Sloan, knocked him to the ground, and then accelerated forward, running over both men. Sloan survived, but Carter, just 55 years old, was killed instantly. The video was horrifying. Knight fled the scene, but the law quickly caught up to him. Charged with murder, he faced the very real possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. In 2018, just before the trial was set to begin, Knight agreed to a plea deal. He pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter, but because of his long history of violent crime, California's three strikes law came crashing down on him. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison, a punishment that guaranteed the once feared king of death row would never regain his power. Today, Suge Knight sits in a prison cell at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. He will not be eligible for parole until 2034. When he will be 69 years old, a far cry from the ruthless mogul who once had hip-hop at his mercy. The empire he built on violence ended with him being consumed by that very violence. Next up, at number 8, it's Corey Miller. Corey Miller, better known as C-Murder, was supposed to be one of the lasting stars of the South. In the 1990s, he rode the wave of Master P's No Limit Records, dropping platinum albums and representing the raw, unfiltered sound of Louisiana street rap. Alongside his brothers Master P and Silk the Shocker, C-Murder was part of the family machine that turned No Limit into one of the most powerful record labels of its time. But the fame and money would not protect him from a night that destroyed everything. On January 12, 2002, C-Murder was at the Platinum Club in Harvey, Louisiana. What started as a typical night out ended in chaos. A fight broke out, and in the mayhem, a 6-year-old fan named Steve Thomas was beaten and fatally shot. Witnesses pointed the finger at Miller, accusing him of pulling the trigger. The police arrested him, and the charges were as serious as they come: second-degree murder. The case dragged on for years, with twists and turns that left people doubting whether the truth was ever really found. In 2003, Miller was convicted, but the ruling didn't stick. A judge overturned it after learning that prosecutors had kept damaging information about their witnesses hidden. For a while, Miller lived under house arrest and even continued releasing music, but his freedom wouldn't last. In 2009, he faced a retrial. This time, the jury initially could not agree. They were deadlocked until the judge pushed them to keep deliberating. When they returned, the verdict was guilty, though only by a 10-2 vote. At the time, Louisiana law allowed non-unanimous jury verdicts in murder cases. That technicality sealed his fate. C-Murder was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and shipped off to Angola, a prison notorious for being one of the toughest in the United States. From the very start, Miller claimed he was innocent. Over the years, his case became one of the most debated in hip-hop. Two witnesses later recanted, admitting they were pressured by police to say Miller was the shooter. Even a juror came forward, saying she was bullied into changing her vote to guilty just to end the arguments in the jury room. These revelations fueled campaigns for his release, with celebrities like Kim Kardashian and Monica, the R&B singer who once dated him, pushing for a new trial. But despite all the doubts and the new claims, Corey Miller is still locked up in Angola. In 7th place, we have Shine. At the end of the 1990s, Sean Diddy Combs was still searching for someone who could carry the torch left behind by the notorious B.I.G. That search seemed over when he discovered a young Belizean immigrant named Jamal Barrow, better known as Shine. Growing up in Brooklyn, Shine had a rough childhood, but his gravelly voice and raw storytelling caught people's attention immediately. His sound reminded everyone of Biggie, and his presence made him look like the next big thing at Bad Boy Records. Before his debut album even dropped, he was already rapping alongside heavyweights and was seen as the heir to a throne that had been empty since Biggie's death. But just as his career was about to explode, one night changed everything. On December 27, 1999, Shine was out at Club New York in Manhattan with Diddy and Jennifer Lopez. The night started out glamorous but turned into chaos when an argument broke out inside the club. Suddenly, shots rang out. People scrambled for cover. When the smoke cleared, 3 bystanders were left injured. The fallout was immediate. Diddy, with one of the best legal teams money could buy, fought the charges against him and walked away free. Shine wasn't as lucky. He admitted to firing a gun during the altercation, saying he did it to protect himself, but that did not sway the court. In June 2001, he was convicted of assault, reckless endangerment, and weapons possession. His punishment was brutal, 10 years in prison. His self-titled debut album was released during the trial, and despite the scandal, it still went gold, proof that the hype around him was real. From behind bars, he even managed to put out another record, Godfather Buried Alive. But music couldn't stop reality. Shine spent nearly 9 years behind bars before finally walking free in 2009. Freedom, however, didn't last long. Because he wasn't a U.S. citizen, immigration officers were waiting for him the moment he stepped out. He was deported back to Belize, a country he had left as a child. Over the years, Shine has claimed that he was made the fall guy to protect Diddy's empire. Whether that is true or not, his music career was cut off before it had the chance to grow. But Shine's story didn't end in tragedy. Instead of fading away, he reinvented himself completely. He converted to Orthodox Judaism, changed his name to Moses Michael Levi Barrow, and later entered politics in Belize. Against all odds, he rose to become a member of parliament and eventually the leader of the opposition. At number 6, we have Lil' Kim. If Shine's downfall came in a flash of violence, Lil' Kim's prison time came from loyalty, a loyalty that cost her everything. As the notorious B.I.G.'s protege, Kimberly Jones had already made her mark as one of the boldest and most influential female rappers ever. By the early 2000s, she was a multi-platinum superstar with Grammys, hit records, and a fearless image that made her an icon. But her loyalty to her crew would end up sending her to prison. It all started on February 25, 2001, outside the New York radio station Hot 97. Lil' Kim's entourage clashed with members of the rap group Capone and Noriega. Tensions boiled over, and suddenly more than 20 shots were fired in broad daylight. When the dust settled, one man had been injured. For the authorities, this wasn't just another rap feud. It was a shootout in the middle of New York City, and someone had to be held accountable. When Kim was called before a grand jury, she made a fateful decision. She claimed she hadn't seen her manager, Damian Butler, or her close friend Suif Gutta Jackson at the scene. The problem was that prosecutors had security footage proving the opposite. To them, it was clear. Kim was lying to protect her people. The case went to trial, and in March 2005, the jury convicted her on 3 counts of perjury and 1 count of conspiracy. That July, she was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison and ordered to pay a $50,000 fine. She served about 10 months before being released in July 2006. Even while locked up, Lil' Kim's artistry shone. Her 4th album, The Naked Truth, came out during her sentence and was praised by critics, earning the rare honor of a 5 mic rating from the Source magazine, something no other female rapper had ever achieved. But despite the critical acclaim, her absence from the spotlight made it impossible for the album to reach its commercial potential. Her career never fully bounced back to the heights it had reached before prison. Remy Ma is another rapper who went behind bars. Born Reminisce Smith and discovered by Big Pun, she came up with fire in her verses and a delivery so sharp it cut through every beat. By the time she linked with Fat Joe's Terror Squad and tore into the 2004 anthem Lean Back, the world knew she wasn't just another rapper trying to make it. She was built for greatness. A Grammy nomination and respect from every corner of the industry made it clear she was on her way to becoming one of the most powerful women in hip-hop. But her rise came crashing down in July 2007. After leaving a party in Manhattan, Remy accused her friend Makeda Barnes Joseph of stealing $3,000 from her purse. What started as an argument turned violent when Remy pulled out a gun and shot Barnes Joseph in the stomach. The victim survived, but the damage was done. In 2008, Remy Ma was convicted of assault, weapon possession, and attempted coercion. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison. She served 6 before walking out of Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in 2014. For most artists, 6 years away from the spotlight would be career suicide, but Remy refused to let prison be her final chapter. She stepped back into the world hungry, focused, and ready to rewrite her story. Reality TV gave her the stage first. Love and hip-hop. New York put her back in front of millions, showing fans her life with rapper Papoose and her journey to rebuild what she'd lost. But it wasn't just television that brought her back. In 2016, she reunited with Fat Joe for All the Way Up, a track that exploded into a multi-platinum hit and scored Grammy nominations. From there, she re-established herself as a dominant voice, even going head-to-head with Nicki Minaj in one of hip-hop's biggest modern beefs, dropping the scathing "shether" that had the whole industry talking. Remy Ma's story is one of the rare examples in hip-hop where a prison sentence didn't bury a career, it became part of her legend. She came out stronger, sharper, and more respected than before, proving that redemption in rap is real if you're bold enough to take it. At number 4, we have Mystical. If Remy's tale is about survival and reinvention, Mystical's is about how some mistakes are so dark they can destroy everything an artist built. Michael Tyler, better known as Mystical, was a powerhouse in the late 1990s and early 2000s. His James Brown-like energy, wild stage presence, and explosive flow made him one of the most unique voices in Southern rap. Hits like Shake Ya Ass and Danger Been So Long had him riding high with platinum records and a reputation as one of No Limit's most electrifying stars. But at the peak of his fame, his life unraveled. In 2003, Mystical was accused of a shocking crime. He had accused his hairstylist of stealing $80,000 in checks. Instead of handling it through the law, Mystical and 2 bodyguards forced her to perform videotaping the assault as so-called payback. When the evidence surfaced, there was no way to deny it. In 2004, he pleaded guilty to battery and extortion. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in prison, calling the act one of terror and humiliation, and pointed out that Mystical's remorse came only after he was caught. He served every day of that sentence and was released in 2010. But freedom didn't erase what happened. Mystical tried to rebuild, releasing new music and even appearing on tracks with major artists like Mark Ronson. But his past hung over him like a storm cloud. Every attempt at a comeback was drowned out by the memory of his crime. Making matters worse, he faced multiple new allegations of after his release. Even when some of the charges were dropped, the damage to his name was permanent. Unlike rappers who could bounce back from violent crimes or cases, Mystical's conviction carried a stigma that the public wasn't willing to forgive. In hip-hop, the streets often romanticize certain kinds of crimes, but is different. It's unforgivable in the eyes of many fans. T.I. is number 3 on the list. By the mid-2000s, T.I. wasn't just another rapper from Atlanta. He had crowned himself the King of the South, and almost everyone agreed he had earned it. With multiple platinum albums, Grammy Awards, and his Grand Hustle label building new stars, T.I. was at the very top. He was even breaking into Hollywood, landing roles like his part in American Gangster. And in 2008, he dropped Paper Trail, an album written while he was under house arrest, which went on to be his biggest success, fueled by chart-topping singles like Whatever You Like and Live Your Life. But at the height of his reign, everything almost collapsed in one night. On October 13, 2007, the same day he was supposed to headline the Bet Hip Hop Awards in Atlanta, federal agents swarmed in and arrested him. T.I. had been caught trying to buy a stash of illegal machine guns and silencers through his bodyguard, who was secretly working with authorities. For a man with a prior felony, just touching a firearm was already illegal. Getting caught trying to buy an arsenal was enough to put him away for at least a decade. What happened next showed the power of strategy and celebrity. Instead of waiting for sentencing, T.I. threw himself into community service. He spoke to thousands of kids about gun violence, logged over 1,000 hours in schools and community centers, and worked to change his public image from felon to role model. By the time he stood in front of the judge in 2009, he wasn't just a rapper facing charges. He was a man trying to turn his mistake into a lesson for others. The judge gave him 1 year and a day in prison, a sentence that shocked many who expected him to get much worse. He served his time but landed back behind bars in 2010 after violating probation with a drug-related arrest in Los Angeles, this time serving nearly another year. Still, when T.I. returned to the outside world, he managed something rare. He rebuilt. He put his family in the spotlight with the VH1 series T.I. and Tiny, The Family Hustle, showing himself not just as the King of the South, but as a devoted father and husband. He kept releasing music, starred in films, and used his prison stint as a turning point instead of the end of his career. Down to number 2, we have Ja Rule. Ja Rule's story, on the other hand, is a reminder that not every rapper finds a way back. In the early 2000s, Ja Rule was everywhere. His raspy, aggressive voice paired with R&B hooks became a formula that dominated radio. With hits like Always on Time with Ashanti and I'm Real with Jennifer Lopez, he turned himself into one of the most successful artists of the decade. His albums went multi-platinum, and for a while, it seemed like nothing could stop him. But hip-hop is unforgiving. His feud with 50 Cent stripped away his street credibility and marked the beginning of his downfall. Then came the legal problem. In July 2007, after a concert, police pulled over his car for speeding and found a loaded .40 caliber handgun inside. While he was fighting that case, federal prosecutors came after him for something even bigger: tax evasion. They accused him of not paying taxes on over $3 million of income between 2004 and 2008. With both cases stacked against him, Ja Rule pleaded guilty. In 2011, he was sentenced to 2 years in state prison for the gun charge, alongside a 28-month federal sentence for tax evasion. He began serving in June 2011 and spent about 2 years behind bars before being released in 2013. By the time he got out, the hip-hop world had already moved on. His prison sentence didn't interrupt his peak, it came after it. And in music, timing is everything. While T.I. returned to the spotlight, Ja Rule never regained his old dominance. He tried with reality TV, acting, and even wrote a memoir, but his music career never recovered. Today, his name is often remembered more for nostalgia and the disastrous Fyre Festival than for the run of hits that once made him a superstar. And finally, taking the #1 spot, it's Fat Joe. Fat Joe has always been more than just another rapper out of New York. Joseph Cartagena, known worldwide as Fat Joe, came up in the gritty Bronx streets during the early 1990s, spitting alongside the Diggin' in the Crates crew, and later building his own empire with Terror Squad. He carried Big Pun to the forefront, crafted timeless hits like What's Love with Ashanti, and gave the world Lean Back, one of the most unforgettable club anthems of the 2000s. His career stretched across decades, and his name earned respect both in the streets and in the industry. But in hip-hop, trouble doesn't always come with guns or sometimes it comes in the form of paperwork. By the time 2012 rolled around, Fat Joe's problem wasn't a beef with another rapper, it was the IRS. The government accused him of failing to pay taxes on more than $3 million in income between 2007 and 2010. This wasn't pocket change. The money came from tours, music royalties, and the kind of checks rappers dream about. But instead of going to Uncle Sam, that cash disappeared through his New Jersey corporations, leaving the IRS short by more than $700,000. Facing the charges, Fat Joe didn't try to fight what he couldn't beat. He stood in court and pleaded guilty to tax evasion in December 2012. The following June, a federal judge sentenced him to 4 months in prison. For a man who had once rapped about hustling his way to the top, it was a humbling moment. In August 2013, he turned himself in at a federal detention center in Miami and served his time, walking out in November of that same year. Unlike other rappers whose careers never recovered after prison, Fat Joe's bid was short enough that it barely put a dent in his legacy. If anything, it added another chapter to his story. When he came home, he didn't try to act like it never happened. He leaned into it, owning up to his mistakes and moving forward. Over time, he reinvented himself as one of hip-hop's elder statesmen, a respected OG whose word carries weight.